By the time they
You've seen
broke for
better days,
dinner,
haven't you?
Marcus's head was
Let's see if we
spinning
can
with
get you
new
moving.
concepts, but he was also
up,
energized in a
now.
way he
I'm
hadn't
coming.
been for
We
years.
have to move.
This project would either kill him or change everything humanity thought they
Thanks
knew
for
about
being here.
technology.
I
Either
needed
way, it was going to be one hell of a ride. 6 weeks into the project, Marcus's workshop had transformed into something that barely resembled a terrestrial facility. Strange crystalline structures grew from specially designed substrates, pulsing with energy patterns that defied conventional physics. The air itself seemed to shimmer with quantum disturbances, and more than once Marcus had caught glimpses of spaces that shouldn't exist. The breakthrough had come when Sarah finally cracked the mathematics behind Zixthera's quantum crystalline matrix. It wasn't just about processing information. The crystals actually created tiny pockets of folded space-time where thoughts could exist independently of their physical substrate. "It's like looking at the universe through God's eyes," Sarah had whispered when the first test crystals successfully booted up. "These things don't just compute reality. They actually reshape it on a microscopic level." Now, as Marcus carefully aligned the 73rd quantum resonator, he could feel the growing presence in his workshop. Zixthera was slowly coming back to consciousness, one crystal at a time. "The neural pathways are stabilizing," reported Dr. Sid. Elena Vasquez, the team's new xenobiologist. She had arrived 3 weeks ago when word reached the academic community that someone was actually attempting to rebuild the Dragon Emperor. Her expertise in non-human consciousness had proved invaluable. "Marcus," Zixthera's voice echoed from the newly constructed communication array, stronger now than it had been in weeks. "I can feel my thoughts beginning to coalesce. The work you have done, it is remarkable." Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead and stepped back to admire their progress. The central chamber now contained a structure that looked like a crystal tree, its branches reaching toward the ceiling in patterns that seemed to follow some organic logic. Each crystal node pulsed in rhythm with its neighbors, creating waves of light that flowed through the entire system like a heartbeat. "How much of your original consciousness have we restored?" Marcus asked. "Perhaps 30%, Zixthara replied. "Enough to access my long-term memories and basic personality matrices. The tactical and combat subroutines remain offline as you requested." That had been one of Marcus's key demands. They would rebuild Zixthera's ship and consciousness, but the weapon systems and military programming would remain locked away until they could be certain of his intentions. "We're ready for the next phase," Marcus announced to the team. "Time to start work on the ship's physical structure." The task before them was staggering. The Eternal Claw hadn't just been a ship. It had been a living organism, capable of existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Its hull was made of self-repairing crystalline matrices that could adapt to any environment. Its engines tapped directly into the quantum vacuum, drawing energy from the fundamental forces of reality itself. Jake had spent the last week setting up the construction bay where they would attempt to grow the ship's hull. The process, as Zixthara explained it, was more like cultivation than traditional manufacturing. "You begin with a seed crystal," Zixthara instructed as they gathered around the construction platform. "A single matrix that contains the genetic information, if you will, for the entire vessel." Marcus held the seed crystal in his palm. It was no larger than a marble, but it felt warm against his skin and seemed to pulse with its own life force. According to Zixthara, this tiny crystal contained the blueprints for a ship that would be nearly 10 kilometers long when fully grown. "The growth medium must be prepared with extreme precision," Zixthara continued. "Too much quantum flux and the crystal will grow too quickly, creating structural weaknesses. Too little and it will remain dormant." Sarah monitored the energy readings as Marcus carefully placed the seed crystal into the prepared substrate. The moment it touched the growth medium, the crystal began to glow more brightly. "Quantum resonance is building," Sarah reported. "Energy patterns are within acceptable parameters." Slowly, incredibly, the crystal began to grow. Crystalline structures sprouted from its surface like branches, reaching out in all directions. But these weren't random formations. They followed specific patterns that seemed to encode complex information. "This is how we built our ships in the old days," Zixthara explained, his voice carrying a note of nostalgia. "Each vessel was grown from a seed that contained the accumulated knowledge of our species. No two ships were ever exactly alike. The growth process was mesmerizing to watch. The crystal structures seemed to know exactly where they needed to go, forming the beginnings of what would eventually become the ship's internal framework." Marcus could see the outlines of corridors, chambers, and systems taking shape within the crystalline matrix. "How long will this take?" Elena asked, recording everything with her instruments. "At the current growth rate, approximately 4 months to reach full size," Zixthara replied. "But the process can be accelerated if necessary." "No," Marcus said firmly. "We're not rushing this. I want every system checked and double-checked before we activate anything critical." As the days passed, the ship continued to grow at a steady pace. Marcus found himself spending more and more time in the construction bay, watching the crystalline structure take shape. There was something hypnotic about the process, the way the crystals seemed to know exactly what they were building. But it wasn't just the ship that was changing. Marcus noticed that his own understanding of engineering was evolving as well. Working with Zixthara's technology had opened his mind to concepts that human science was only beginning to explore. "You're thinking differently," Sarah observed one evening as they reviewed the day's progress. "I can see it in the way you approach problems now." Marcus looked up from the quantum resonance charts he was studying. "What do you mean? You used to think in terms of discrete components, engines, hulls, life support systems. Now you're thinking about the ship as a single organism. It's like you're starting to see technology the way Zixthara's people did." She was right, Marcus realized. The old human approach to engineering, with its emphasis on separate systems and mechanical interfaces, was beginning to feel primitive compared to the integrated organic design philosophy of the Draconi. "Is that a bad thing?" Marcus asked. "I don't know," Sarah admitted, "but it's definitely changing you." The first real crisis came in the 8th week. Marcus was running diagnostics on the ship's partially formed neural network when every alarm in the facility started blaring at once. Red lights flashed as emergency protocols activated automatically. "What's happening?" Jake shouted over the noise. "Cascade failure in the quantum matrix," Sarah reported from her control station. "The growth pattern is destabilizing." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. If the ship's structure collapsed now, they would lose weeks of work and potentially damage the consciousness matrix they had so carefully rebuilt. "Zixthara, what do we do?" Marcus called out. "The resonance frequencies have fallen out of alignment," Zixthara replied, his voice strained. "You must manually recalibrate the quantum generators before the cascade spreads to the core structure." Marcus didn't hesitate. He grabbed an emergency toolkit and ran toward the construction bay, ignoring the safety protocols that warned against entering the area during a quantum cascade. "Marcus, don't!" Sarah screamed after him. "The radiation levels are off the charts." But Marcus was already through the containment barrier. The construction bay was a chaos of flashing lights and unstable energy patterns. The partially grown ship writhed like a living thing in pain, its crystalline structure flickering between dimensional states. Marcus reached the primary quantum generator and began making adjustments to the resonance frequency. The controls were alien, based on mathematical principles that human science was still struggling to understand, but somehow his hands seemed to know what to do. "Frequency adjusted by 0.7%, he reported through his communicator. "Not enough," Zixthara replied. "The cascade is still spreading. You need to access the core matrix directly." Marcus looked toward the heart of the crystalline structure, where the ship's central consciousness matrix was taking shape. To reach it, he would have to enter the quantum field itself, exposing himself to radiation levels that could kill him in minutes. "There has to be another way," Sarah's voice crackled through the interference. "There isn't," Marcus said quietly. He understood now why Zixthara had chosen him for this project. It wasn't just his engineering skills, it was his willingness to do whatever was necessary to save something worth saving. Marcus stepped into the quantum field. The sensation was indescribable. His consciousness seemed to expand, touching the edges of realities that existed beyond normal perception. He could feel the ship's growing awareness, its confusion and pain as its structure began to collapse. "I'm here," Marcus whispered, placing his hands on the core matrix. "I'm going to fix this." Working by instinct more than knowledge, Marcus began to realign the quantum pathways that controlled the ship's growth patterns. It was like performing surgery on a living mind, requiring a delicate touch and absolute precision. The minutes stretched into eternity as Marcus fought to stabilize the cascade. His body was being flooded with quantum radiation, and he could feel his cellular structure beginning to break down. But he couldn't stop, not when they were so close to success. "Got it!" Marcus gasped as the final pathway clicked into place. The cascade collapse stopped, and the ship's structure began to stabilize. Marcus collapsed to his knees, his body shaking from radiation exposure. Through the fading emergency lights, he could see his team rushing toward him. "Get him to the medical bay!" Elena shouted. "Now!" As they carried him away, Marcus caught a glimpse of the ship's structure. It was more beautiful than anything he had ever seen. A crystalline cathedral that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the human eye could perceive. "Thank you, Marcus Chen." Zixthara's voice followed him into unconsciousness. "You have saved us both." Marcus spent 3 days in the medical bay while Dr. Vasquez worked to repair the cellular damage caused by his exposure to the quantum field. The treatment was experimental, combining human medical technology with healing techniques that Zixthara had shared from his people's archives. "You should be dead," Elena told him bluntly as he sat up in the medical bed. "The radiation exposure you sustained would have killed 10 normal humans. But I'm not dead," Marcus pointed out. "No, you're not, and that's the interesting part." Elena pulled up a holographic display showing Marcus's cellular structure. "The quantum radiation didn't just damage your cells, it also enhanced them. Your neural pathways are showing increased conductivity, and your body is processing energy more efficiently than before." Marcus studied the display with growing amazement. "You're saying the radiation changed me? On a fundamental level, yes. You're still human, but you're also something more now, something adapted to work with Zixthara's technology." When Marcus finally returned to the construction bay, he found that the ship had grown significantly during his recovery. The basic hull was nearly complete, a graceful structure that seemed to flow like liquid metal despite being made of crystalline matrix. "You missed the installation of the primary neural core," Jake informed him as they walked through the ship's emerging corridors. "Zixthara insisted on waiting for you before activating it." The neural core was housed in what would eventually become the ship's bridge. It was a chamber filled with crystalline formations that pulsed with soft light, creating patterns that seemed almost alive. "Are you ready, Marcus Chen?" Zixthara's voice echoed from speakers throughout the chamber. Marcus looked around at his team, Sarah, Jake, Elena, and a dozen other specialists who had joined the project over the past weeks. They had all risked everything to be part of this unprecedented undertaking. "We're ready," Marcus said. "Then let us begin the awakening." The neural core flared to life, and suddenly the ship was truly alive. Marcus could feel its consciousness stirring, like a vast mind emerging from a long sleep. The crystalline walls around them hummed with activity as millions of quantum processors came online simultaneously. "Hello!" a new voice said, different from Zixthara's but unmistakably related. We are awakening." Marcus realized he was witnessing the birth of something entirely new. Not just the resurrection of the Dragon Emperor, but the creation of a hybrid consciousness that combined Zixthara's ancient knowledge with the ship's newly grown awareness. "Can you hear me?" Marcus asked. "Yes, Marcus Chen, we can hear you. We remember you. You are the one who rebuilt us, who gave us new life. There was something different about this voice, something that spoke of vast intelligence combined with genuine gratitude. This wasn't the cold, calculating dragon emperor of legend. This was something new. "What should we call you?" Elena asked, her scientific instruments recording every aspect of the awakening. The consciousness was quiet for a long moment, as if considering the question carefully. When it finally spoke, there was a note of wonder in its voice. "We are Eternal Dawn," it said. "For that is what you have given us, Marcus Chen. A new day after the long night of our destruction." Marcus smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. They had done it! Against all odds, despite every rational argument against it, they had successfully rebuilt one of the most powerful beings in galactic history. Now came the real test. They would have to discover whether their creation would honor its promise to protect humanity, or whether they had unleashed a new terror upon the galaxy. Only time would tell. 3 months after the awakening of Eternal Dawn, the ship had completed its growth phase and hung in the asteroid belt beyond Kepler 442b like a crystalline leviathan. Its hull stretched nearly 10 kilometers from bow to stern, but its true size was impossible to measure since portions of the vessel existed in folded space-time dimensions. Marcus stood on the ship's bridge, still amazed by what they had accomplished. The command center was unlike anything in human design. Organic curves of living crystal that responded to thought as much as touch. Displays weren't screens but three-dimensional constructs of light and energy that could present information in ways that bypassed normal human perception. "The integration is proceeding smoothly," Eternal Dawn reported, its voice now emanating from throughout the ship rather than from specific speakers. "All primary systems are online and functioning within optimal parameters." Sarah looked up from her station where she was monitoring quantum flux readings. "The power output is incredible. We're seeing energy generation rates that exceed our most optimistic projections." "That's because the ship isn't just using conventional reactors," explained Eternal Dawn. "The hull itself is drawing energy from quantum fluctuations in the vacuum of space. Every atom of the vessel is essentially a tiny power generator." Jake whistled in appreciation as he reviewed the engineering schematics. "At this rate, you could power an entire star system. Or defend one," Eternal Dawn added quietly. The comment sent a chill through the bridge. Despite months of working together, none of them had forgotten what Eternal Dawn had once been. The Dragon Emperor's memories were still there, locked away but not erased. They all wondered what would happen when those memories were eventually accessed. The question became urgent when long-range sensors detected something approaching the outer edge of the system. "Unknown contact," reported Lieutenant Sarah Kim, the tactical officer they had brought aboard for the ship's initial trials. "Distance approximately 50 astronomical units and closing." Marcus felt his stomach clench. "Can you identify it?" "Negative. The energy signature doesn't match any known vessel type." Eternal Dawn's voice took on a more serious tone. "Marcus, I need to access my tactical memories. Whatever is approaching, it's not from any civilization currently active in this galaxy." "How can you be sure?" "Because I know the energy signature. I've encountered it before, during the early days of my reign. These are void dwellers, the entities I warned you about." The bridge fell silent as everyone processed this information. The moment they had all been dreading had arrived. The first test of whether Eternal Dawn could be trusted with its full capabilities. "What are you asking for?" Marcus said carefully. "Access to my weapons systems and combat memories. Without them, I cannot effectively defend this system against what is coming." Marcus looked around at his team. The decision ultimately rested with him, but he could see the fear and uncertainty in their faces. They had all known this moment would come eventually. "What exactly are these void dwellers?" Elena asked from her xenobiology station. "Entities that exist in the spaces between realities," Eternal Dawn explained. "They feed on the quantum energy that binds matter together. Where they pass, entire star systems simply cease to exist. Not destroyed, unmade, at a fundamental level. The tactical display updated as the approaching contact came into better resolution. What they saw defied easy description. It wasn't a ship in any conventional sense, but rather a shifting mass of darkness that seemed to bend light around itself. Size estimate? Marcus asked. Approximately 300 kilometers in diameter, Sarah Kim reported, her voice barely steady. And it's not alone. I'm detecting at least 12 similar contacts in formation. Marcus felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. Everything they had worked for, everything they had risked, came down to this moment. He could keep Eternal Dawn's weapons locked away and trust that conventional defenses would be enough. Or he could unlock a power that had once terrorized the galaxy. Do it, Marcus said quietly. Release the tactical restrictions. Are you certain? Eternal Dawn asked. Once I access those memories, I cannot promise that I will remain exactly what I am now. I trust you, Marcus said, surprised to realize that he meant it. The ship shuddered as vast systems that had been dormant suddenly came online. The bridge displays shifted, showing weapon configurations and defensive capabilities that exceeded anything in human experience. Tactical memories integrated, Eternal Dawn reported. Its voice had changed subtly, carrying new depths and complexities. I remember now. The Battle of the Andromedan Reach. The fall of the Crystal Cities. So much death. Marcus held his breath, waiting to see what effect the restored memories would have on their rebuilt emperor. I remember why I became what I was, Eternal Dawn continued, and I remember why I cannot be that again. The approaching Void Dwellers had detected their presence and were adjusting course to intercept. On the tactical display, Marcus could see the formation breaking apart as the entities prepared for individual attacks. They're going to try to overwhelm our defenses with multiple simultaneous strikes, Eternal Dawn explained. It's their standard tactic against conventional forces. What makes you think we're not conventional? Sarah asked. Because we have something they don't expect. A ship designed specifically to fight entities like them. The Eternal Claw had been built for battles against creatures that existed outside normal physics. Its weapon systems didn't just damage matter, they could attack the fundamental forces that held reality together. Beginning combat maneuvers, Eternal Dawn announced. Marcus felt the ship respond around him, not like a machine following programmed instructions, but like a living creature moving with purpose and intent. The crystalline hull began to glow as defensive systems activated. The first Void Dweller reached firing range and unleashed an attack that seemed to tear holes in space-time itself. Dark energy lanced toward them, but the ship's defensive barriers absorbed the impact without visible strain. Returning fire, Eternal Dawn said. The ship's primary weapon systems activated, and Marcus witnessed something that challenged his understanding of physics. Streams of coherent quantum energy reached out across space, not just toward the attacking entities, but somehow around them, striking from angles that didn't exist in normal three-dimensional space. The lead Void Dweller simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed or vaporized. It was there one moment and gone the next, as if it had never existed at all. How? Jake breathed. The weapons target the quantum foundations that allow the entities to manifest in our reality, Eternal Dawn explained while engaging two more attackers simultaneously. We're not destroying them. We're sending them back to the void between dimensions. The battle continued for nearly an hour, with Eternal Dawn systematically dismantling the attacking formation. But Marcus noticed something that both impressed and concerned him. The ship wasn't just winning. It was doing so with a clinical efficiency that spoke of vast experience in this type of combat. "You've fought these things before," Marcus said. "Many times." "For centuries," Eternal Dawn confirmed. "It was my people's purpose before I became what I became. We were the guardians of the dimensional barriers, the defenders against incursion from the void. The last of the Void Dwellers was banished back to whatever realm had spawned them. leaving the system once again at peace. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this had been just a probe, a test of their defenses. "There will be more!" Eternal Dawn confirmed his fears. "The Void Dwellers have been watching this galaxy for millennia, waiting for an opportunity to break through. My destruction created weak points in the dimensional barriers that they've been slowly exploiting." "How many more?" Elena asked. "Unknown. But based on the energy signatures I detected, they've established at least 3 major breach points within 100 light-years of this system." Marcus sank into the command chair, trying to process the implications. They had successfully rebuilt the Dragon Emperor and proven that he could be trusted with his full power. But in doing so, they had also confirmed the existence of a threat that could potentially end all life in the galaxy. "We need to warn the Council," Sarah said. "Get the fleet mobilized. Conventional fleets will be useless against these entities." Eternal Dawn pointed out. "The weapons and defenses of your current technology simply cannot affect creatures that exist in quantum superposition." "Then what do we do?" Jake asked. Eternal Dawn was quiet for a long moment before responding. "We rebuild the Guardians. My people are gone, but their knowledge survives. With your permission, I would like to begin training human crews in the construction and operation of Guardian-class vessels." Marcus felt the magnitude of what was being proposed. "You're talking about fundamentally altering human civilization. I'm talking about ensuring its survival. The Void Dwellers will not stop with this one probe. They are patient beyond your imagination, but they are also relentless. Eventually, they will mount a full-scale invasion of this reality." The bridge was quiet except for the subtle hum of the ship's systems. Marcus could feel his team waiting for his decision. Once again, the fate of not just their mission, but potentially all human civilization, rested on his shoulders. "How long do we have?" Marcus asked. "Based on the energy patterns I observed, I estimate 18 months before they attempt a major incursion, possibly less if they detect significant resistance to their probes." 18 months to transform humanity from a species that barely understood quantum physics into builders of guardian ships. It seemed impossible, but then again, so had rebuilding the Dragon Emperor. "Sarah," Marcus said, turning to his quantum physicist, "how quickly could you train a team of human engineers in crystal matrix technology?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Maybe 6 months to get the basics across to a dedicated team, another year to train them to the point where they could attempt independent construction." "That's not fast enough," Elena pointed out. "We need ships, not just engineers." "Then we'll have to get creative," Marcus said, an idea beginning to form in his mind. "Eternal Dawn, can your ship reproduce itself? Create daughter vessels that carry copies of your consciousness?" "Not exactly copies," Eternal Dawn replied thoughtfully. "But yes, I can spawn new ship consciousnesses that share my knowledge and capabilities. Each would be unique, developing its own personality over time, but they would retain the core knowledge necessary to fight Void Dwellers. How many? With sufficient resources, perhaps a dozen ships over the next year." Marcus stood up, his decision made. "Then that's what we're going to do. We're going to build a fleet of Guardian ships and prepare humanity for a war unlike anything they've ever imagined." "And the Council?" Jake asked. "Are we going to tell them what's coming?" Marcus looked out at the stars through the bridge's crystalline viewports. Somewhere out there, ancient evils were stirring, preparing to unmake reality itself. Humanity was about to face its greatest challenge, and their only hope lay in the wisdom of a reformed tyrant and the dedication of engineers who had learned to build miracles. "We'll tell them," Marcus said. "But first, we need to show them what's possible. We need to prove that humans can learn to build guardian ships." "Where do we start?" Sarah asked. Marcus smiled, feeling the familiar excitement of beginning a new project. "We start by finding the right people. Engineers, physicists, pilots who aren't afraid to learn technologies that will change their fundamental understanding of the universe." "People like us," Elena said with a grin. "People like us," Marcus agreed. Because if there's one thing I've learned from working with Eternal Dawn, it's that humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our weapons. It's our willingness to try the impossible. As the ship began to move toward the inner system, preparing to return to the shipyard where their incredible journey had begun, Marcus felt a deep sense of purpose. They had rebuilt a fallen emperor and discovered a threat that could end civilization. Now it was time to see if they could save the galaxy. The Galactic Council's emergency session convened on the neutral station of Harmony Point, a massive structure that floated in the void between the territories of the major spacefaring civilizations. Representatives from 47 different species gathered in the Great Chamber, their varied forms a testament to the diversity of life in the galaxy. Marcus Chen stood at the center of the chamber, feeling the weight of hundreds of alien eyes upon him. Beside him, projected as a hologram, Eternal Dawn's current avatar appeared, a tall figure that combined elements of the ancient Draconie with subtle human features. "The human claims to have rebuilt the Dragon Emperor," announced Consul Vextai of the Ethereal Collective, her crystalline form shimmering with skeptical colors. "This is either madness or the greatest threat to galactic peace in 3 millennia. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Marcus had expected this reaction. To most of the galaxy, the Dragon Emperor represented the ultimate evil, a force of destruction that had consumed entire civilizations. "Honored delegates," Marcus began, his voice carried by translation systems to every corner of the chamber. "I stand before you not as the creator of a weapon, but as someone who helped birth a guardian. The entity you know as the Dragon Emperor is dead. What stands with me today is something new, something dedicated to protecting the very civilizations it once threatened." "Pretty words," growled General Thokran of the Hegemony War Clans. "But words cannot erase the memory of burned worlds and slaughtered billions." Eternal Dawn's hologram stepped forward. "General, you speak truly. I cannot erase the crimes of my past, nor do I seek to minimize them. But I can tell you that those crimes pale before the threat that now approaches this galaxy." The chamber fell silent as Eternal Dawn activated a holographic display showing the recent Void Dweller incursion. The assembled delegates watched in stunned silence as the battle unfolded, showing entities that defied their understanding of physics. "These are the Void Dwellers," Eternal Dawn explained. "I fought them for millennia before my fall into tyranny. They are not conquerors seeking resources or territory. They are devourers of reality itself. Where they pass, entire star systems simply cease to exist." Ambassador Kelthara of the Symbiont Cluster raised a tentacled appendage. "Assuming this footage is genuine, why should we trust you to lead our defense? Your past actions hardly inspire confidence." Marcus felt the moment slipping away. The delegates were too focused on Eternal Dawn's history to see the magnitude of the current threat. He needed to change their perspective. "Because I rebuilt him," Marcus said loudly, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversations. "Not because he was the Dragon Emperor, but because he was broken." The chamber quieted as delegates turned their attention to the human engineer. "My name is Marcus Chen, and I repair things for a living. For 15 years, I've taken the broken, the discarded, the supposedly impossible, and made them whole again. When I first encountered what remained of the Dragon Emperor, I didn't see a tyrant. I saw the most complex engineering challenge of my life." Marcus activated his own holographic display showing the fragments of Zixthera as they had first appeared. These 17 pieces contained not just the remains of a consciousness, but 3 million years of knowledge about fighting entities that exist outside our reality. Knowledge that died with the Draconi race. The display shifted to show the reconstruction process, the painstaking work of rebuilding not just a ship, but an entire form of consciousness. "We didn't just put the pieces back together," Marcus continued. "We made something better. Eternal Dawn has the memories and knowledge of the Dragon Emperor, but not his rage, not his arrogance, not his hunger for conquest. The trauma of destruction burned those traits away, leaving behind only the desire to fulfill his people's original purpose." And what was that purpose? Asked Sage Morden of the Contemplation Worlds. Eternal Dawn answered, to guard the barriers between realities, to stand watch against the things that crawl through the spaces between dimensions. For millions of years, my people were the galaxy's shield against the void. When we fell to infighting and eventual extinction, that shield was broken. The Void Dwellers' recent incursion was just a probe, Marcus added. According to Eternal Dawn's analysis, we have less than 18 months before they attempt a full-scale invasion. Our conventional fleets and weapons will be useless against them. Consul Vextai's form flickered with colors indicating deep concern. You're asking us to trust our survival to a rebuilt mass murderer based on the word of one human engineer? No, Marcus said firmly. I'm asking you to trust in humanity's ability to recognize worth where others see only scrap. We've rebuilt Eternal Dawn, but we've also learned his people's technologies. We can teach your engineers to build guardian ships. We can train your crews to fight entities that exist in quantum superposition. General Thokran leaned forward, his massive form dominating his section of the chamber. Even if we accept your claims about these Void Dwellers, why should we believe that guardian ships built by lesser races could match what the Draconi created? Marcus smiled, and there was something in that expression that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. Because humans don't just rebuild things, we improve them. The holographic display changed again, showing technical specifications that made several of the more technically minded delegates gasp in recognition. The original Draconi Guardian ships were powerful but limited, Marcus explained. They required Draconi neural patterns to function properly. The ships we're proposing to build are different. They're designed to interface with any sentient species. A human can pilot them as effectively as a hegemony warrior or an ethereal collective node. Eternal Dawn nodded in agreement. The reconstruction process taught Marcus and his team things about quantum consciousness that even my people never fully understood. The new Guardian ships will be more versatile, more adaptable, and in many ways more powerful than their predecessors. Ambassador Kelthara's tendrils writhed in what Marcus had learned was a sign of intense thought. The technical specifications appear sound, but the construction requirements are staggering. The quantum crystals alone would require the industrial output of entire star systems. Which is why we need the Council's help, Marcus said. Eternal Dawn can spawn daughter consciousnesses to guide construction, but we need access to the raw materials and manufacturing capabilities that only the combined civilizations can provide. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some delegates remained convinced that rebuilding the Dragon Emperor was itself an act of madness. Others worried about the implications of giving humans access to guardian ship technology. A few questioned whether the Void Dweller threat was real or simply an elaborate deception. It was Sage Morden who finally spoke the words that would change the course of galactic history. I have reviewed the technical data provided by Engineer Chen and his team, the ancient being announced. The quantum signatures of the entities he calls Void Dwellers match references in our oldest archives. Records that speak of the time before the Great Silence, when entire sectors of the galaxy simply vanished from all observation. A chill settled over the chamber as delegates absorbed this information. If these records are accurate, Mordun continued, then the Void Dwellers have attempted incursions into our reality before. Each time they were repelled by guardians whose descriptions matched the Draconi vessels. Consul Vextai's form shifted to colors indicating reluctant acceptance. The Contemplation World's archives are the most complete in the galaxy. If Sage Morden confirms the threat, then we must act. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than Marcus had hoped, but decisive enough to matter. 28 civilizations agreed to support the Guardianship project, with 19 abstaining and none voting in opposition. Very well, General Thokran announced. The hegemony will provide industrial support for this endeavor, but we insist on joint oversight of all construction projects. Agreed, Marcus said quickly, before anyone could object. This isn't a human project. It's a galactic one. We'll need the expertise and resources of all participating civilizations. As the session concluded and delegates began to disperse, Marcus found himself approached by a small figure in elaborate robes. It was Coordinator Zixel of the Trade Federation, one of the few species that had remained neutral throughout the Dragon Emperor's reign. Engineer Chen, Zixel said in accented standard, "My people have experience in managing large-scale construction projects across multiple star systems. We would be honored to assist in coordinating the resource requirements for your guardian ships." Marcus felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Coordinator. We're going to need all the help we can get." Over the next several hours, Marcus found himself at the center of an impromptu planning session as representatives from various civilizations gathered to discuss the practical aspects of guardianship construction. The scope of the project was staggering. They would need to establish construction facilities in dozens of star systems, train thousands of engineers and pilots, and coordinate the largest industrial undertaking in galactic history. "The first prototype should be completed within 6 months," Eternal Dawn advised. "Once we have a working example, other civilizations will be more willing to commit resources to the project." "Where should we build it?" asked Chief Engineer Vox Ann of the Synthetic Collective. Marcus looked around at the assembled representatives, seeing species that had been enemies and rivals for centuries now working together toward a common goal. "Earth," he said after a moment. "We'll build the first guardian ship in Sol System. If humanity is going to take the lead on this project, then we should be willing to put our homeworld on the line." The decision sent ripples of approval through the group. Several delegates who had been skeptical of human involvement seemed impressed by Marcus's willingness to risk everything on the project's success. As the planning session continued into the night cycle, Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction. They had achieved something remarkable, not just agreement from the Galactic Council, but genuine cooperation between species that had never worked together before. But he also felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. In 18 months, entities that could unmake reality itself would attempt to invade their galaxy. The guardian ships they were about to build represented the only hope of stopping them. "Eternal Dawn," Marcus said quietly as they reviewed construction timelines. "Are you certain we can do this? Build enough guardian ships in time?" The reformed emperor was silent for a long moment before responding. "I have learned much about humanity during our time together, Marcus Chen. Your species has a remarkable ability to achieve the impossible when properly motivated. If any people can accomplish what we are attempting, it is yours." Marcus nodded, drawing strength from those words. They had rebuilt a fallen emperor and convinced a galaxy to trust in human engineering. Now came the hardest part, proving that they deserved that trust. The fate of the galaxy would depend on their success, but as Marcus looked around at the diverse group of beings working together toward a common goal, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. They were going to build something magnificent. And with any luck, it would be enough to save them all. 16 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of Luna Base, watching as humanity's first guardian ship took its maiden voyage through the asteroid belt. The vessel was magnificent, a crystalline structure, 8 kilometers long that seemed to bend light around itself as it moved. Unlike Eternal Dawn, which retained the organic curves of ancient Draconi design, this ship reflected human engineering aesthetics while incorporating the quantum technologies they had learned. "Humanity's hope is responding perfectly to all commands," reported Captain Sarah Kim through the communication array. She had transitioned from tactical officer to the first human guardian ship commander. Her mind linked directly to the vessel's consciousness through quantum neural interfaces. "How does it feel?" Marcus asked, still amazed that they had successfully created a hybrid human guardian consciousness. "Like I can think with the power of a star," Sarah replied, wonder evident in her voice. "The ship's awareness extends across multiple dimensions simultaneously. I can see threats approaching from angles that don't exist in normal space." Beside Marcus, Eternal Dawn's physical avatar nodded in satisfaction. Over the past months, he had developed the ability to manifest physically through crystalline projections, allowing him to work alongside the construction teams directly. The integration exceeded our projections, Eternal Dawn observed. Human neural patterns have proven remarkably adaptable to guardianship consciousness matrices. Jake Hoffman joined them on the observation deck, his arms covered in quantum crystal dust from the latest construction project. Ship number 7 is nearly ready for consciousness installation. At this rate, we'll have 12 operational Guardian ships before the projected invasion deadline. Marcus felt a mixture of pride and anxiety. They had accomplished something that most of the galaxy had considered impossible, but he couldn't shake the feeling that 12 ships might not be enough. "Any word from the other construction sites?" Marcus asked. "The Hegemony completed their first Guardian ship last week," Jake reported. "General Thokran refused to let humans pilot it, so they're using enhanced neural interfaces with volunteer warriors. Early reports suggest it's working, though not as smoothly as our direct consciousness integration." "And the Ethereal Collective? Their approach is completely different. Instead of individual pilots, they're using collective nodes to control their ships. The result is supposedly a Guardian vessel that thinks like a hive mind." Marcus nodded, pleased that different species were finding ways to adapt Guardian technology to their unique capabilities. The diversity of approaches would make their combined fleet more versatile against the Void Dwellers. The moment of satisfaction was interrupted by alarms throughout Luna Base. Emergency signals flashed as the long-range sensor arrays detected something that made Marcus's blood run cold. "Contact," announced the base's AI system. "Multiple unknown entities detected at the edge of the Oort cloud. Energy signatures match previous Void Dweller encounters." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "They're early. The invasion isn't supposed to start for another 2 months." Eternal Dawn's expression grew grim. "This is not the main invasion. These are advanced scouts testing our new defenses." On the tactical displays, Marcus could see the approaching entities, dozens of them, each one a writhing mass of darkness that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They moved with purpose, arraying themselves in formations that suggested intelligence and strategy. "All Guardian ships, this is command," Marcus broadcasted on the emergency frequency. "Proceed to defensive positions around Earth. This is not a drill." The response was immediate. Humanity's hope changed course, its crystalline hull beginning to glow as weapon systems came online. From bases throughout the Sol system, 11 more Guardian ships began moving toward the outer system perimeter. The hegemony ship Unbreakable Honor is requesting permission to join the defense, reported the communications officer. "Granted," Marcus said without hesitation. "All allied Guardian ships are welcome." As the human fleet moved to intercept the Void Dwellers, Marcus couldn't help but remember the first encounter with these entities months ago. Then, they had only faced a dozen attackers. Now, long-range sensors were detecting nearly 100 Void Dwellers approaching in coordinated formations. "This is going to be our first real test," Eternal Dawn said quietly. "The Void Dwellers have been observing our preparations. They know we have Guardian ships now." The battle began at the edge of the heliopause, where the solar wind met interstellar space. Humanity's hope engaged the first wave of attackers, its quantum weapons reaching across impossible distances to strike entities that existed in folded space-time. "Direct hit on target Alpha 7, Sarah reported. "Entity has been banished back to the void, but for every Void Dweller destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. The enemy was adapting to human tactics, learning from each engagement." "They're not fighting like they did before," Eternal Dawn observed, his consciousness linked to the battle network. "They're probing our defenses, testing different approaches." Marcus watched the tactical display with growing concern. The Guardian ships were performing well, but the Void Dwellers were pressing them hard. Unlike the previous encounter, these entities seemed to have developed specific countermeasures for Guardian ship weapons. "Guardian 7 is taking heavy damage," reported Captain Martinez from the ship Human Resolve. "Request permission to fall back and regroup." Negative, Eternal Dawn said before Marcus could respond. Maintain your position. If we allow them to break our defensive line, they'll have a clear path to Earth. Marcus felt the weight of command settling on his shoulders. Lives hung in the balance with every decision he made. The Guardian ships were powerful, but their pilots were still learning how to fight entities that operated outside conventional physics. The tide of battle began to turn when the hegemony ship Unbreakable Honor arrived, bringing with it tactical innovations that the Void Dwellers hadn't encountered. General Thokran had equipped his ship with weapons that combined Guardian technology with hegemony military doctrine, creating hybrid systems that proved surprisingly effective. Impressive, Eternal Dawn noted as they watched the hegemony ship systematically dismantling a formation of Void Dwellers. They've found a way to channel their warrior instincts through guardianship systems, but even with reinforcements, the battle was far from over. The Void Dwellers had revealed new capabilities, the ability to merge temporarily into larger, more powerful entities that required multiple guardianships working in coordination to defeat. "We need to change our tactics," Sarah reported from Humanity's Hope. In the darkest corner of the galaxy, where even starlight fears to tread, something impossible happened. A human engineer named Marcus Chen stood before the shattered remains of the most feared entity in galactic history, the Dragon Emperor Zixthera. For 3,000 years, this being had ruled with terror, commanding fleets that could crack planets like eggs. Now his consciousness lay dying in fractured quantum matrices, his legendary dreadnought split across 17 dimensions. Every civilized species had tried to destroy the Dragon Emperor completely. The ethereal councils wanted to erase his digital soul. The Void Hunters sought to scatter his ship's remains across black holes. The crystal mines demanded his complete obliteration from reality itself. But Marcus Chen, with his calloused hands and stubborn human heart, looked at the dying tyrant and saw something else entirely: potential for redemption. What happens when humanity's greatest weakness becomes its most dangerous strength? When the capacity for forgiveness meets absolute power? When human hands decide to rebuild what the universe once destroyed? The answer would reshape the cosmos itself, one rivet at a time. Marcus Chen wiped grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better decades. The salvage yard stretched endlessly around him, a graveyard of dreams and ambitions where broken starships came to rust under the pale light of Kepler. 442b's twin suns. He had been working here for 15 years, ever since the war ended, and left half the galaxy's fleet as scrap metal. The morning started like any other. Marcus was elbow-deep in the quantum drive of a defunct Martian cruiser when his partner Jake Hoffman came running across the yard, his face pale as moonlight. "Marcus, you need to see this," Jake gasped, pointing toward the restricted section where the really dangerous salvage was kept. "The Council ships just dropped something off. They're not just random creatures from the void. They're organized, possibly even controlled by some kind of central intelligence." This revelation sent chills through the command center. The idea that the Void Dwellers might have leadership and strategy made them far more dangerous than previously thought. "Can you determine the source of this control?" Eternal Dawn asked. "Not from this data," Elena replied. "But if my theories are correct, there's something in the void directing these incursions. Something intelligent." Marcus absorbed this information while reviewing construction reports from across the galaxy. The various species had thrown themselves into guardianship production with remarkable dedication, but even working at maximum capacity, they would only have 30 operational ships within the next 2 months. "It won't be enough," Jake said, voicing what everyone was thinking. 30 ships against an organized Void Dweller invasion? Eternal Dawn was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "There may be another way." The ancient Draconi created something called a Guardian Prime, a massive ship designed to coordinate entire fleets of Guardian vessels. "I carry the construction protocols in my memory banks." Marcus felt his engineering instincts stirring. "How massive are we talking about?" "Approximately 50 kilometers in length. It would require the resources of multiple star systems to build, And its consciousness matrix would need to be… Eternal Dawn paused, his expression growing troubled. It would need to be more complex than anything we've attempted so far. More complex how? The Guardian Prime requires a consciousness that can think on multiple levels simultaneously. Individual ship awareness, fleet coordination, and strategic planning across galactic distances. It would need to be part ship, part artificial intelligence, and part something that doesn't have a name in human language. Marcus looked around at his team, seeing the same mixture of excitement and terror in their faces that he felt. They had already achieved the impossible once, by rebuilding Eternal Dawn. Now they were being asked to do something even more ambitious. How long would it take to build? Sarah asked. With the combined industrial capacity of all allied civilizations? Approximately 1 year. The timeline was impossible. They had perhaps 6 months before the next Void Dweller incursion, and that one would dwarf what they had just faced. Unless, Eternal Dawn continued, we could convince the galaxy to commit resources on an unprecedented scale. Emergency production protocols, total war footing for every participating civilization. Marcus felt the familiar surge of determination that had driven him through every impossible project of his career. Then that's what we'll do. We'll convince them. How? Jake asked. After today's battle, they know the threat is real, but asking for that kind of resource commitment, Marcus smiled. The expression carrying the confidence of an engineer who had learned that there was no such thing as impossible, only problems that hadn't been solved yet. We'll show them what we can do, Marcus said. We'll build the Guardian Prime, and we'll build it in full view of the galaxy. Every species, every civilization will see what's possible when we work together. Eternal Dawn nodded slowly. It will be the greatest construction project in galactic history. Good, Marcus replied, because that's exactly what we need. As the command staff began planning for the impossible project ahead of them, Marcus felt the same sense of purpose that had driven him to rebuild the Dragon Emperor. They had proven that broken things could be made whole again. Now they would prove that the galaxy itself could be saved, one impossible engineering challenge at a time. The Void Dwellers were coming, but they would find humanity and its allies ready for them. Ready with ships that could think across dimensions, weapons that could unmake reality itself, and the collective will of a galaxy united in common cause. Marcus Chen had rebuilt an emperor. Now he would help build the salvation of the galaxy. The Guardian ships moved through space like crystalline angels, their hulls blazing with the light of quantum stars. Behind them, work had already begun on the greatest ship ever conceived, a vessel that would either save the galaxy or witness its destruction. But Marcus had faith in human hands and alien minds working together. After all, they had already rebuilt the impossible once. They could do it again. Something big. Marcus looked up from his work, his dark eyes studying his friend's expression. In 15 years of salvage work, he had never seen Jake look quite this shaken. They had processed everything from plague ships to vessels carrying unstable dark matter, but this was different. How big? Marcus asked, setting down his plasma torch. 17-dimensional fragments, each one the size of a city block. And Marcus? Jake paused, swallowing hard. There's something alive in there. Something that's been asking for you. The walk to the restricted section took 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. Marcus had heard rumors about the final battle of the Void War, whispers about what had happened when the combined fleets of the Galactic Council finally cornered the Dragon Emperor. For 3 millennia, Zixthera had been the nightmare that haunted civilized space. His dreadnought, the Eternal Claw, had been more than a ship. It was a living weapon that could fold reality around itself. The Council forces had finally managed to trap him in a dimensional cascade, shattering both his consciousness and his vessel across multiple planes of existence. Most people assumed he was dead. Marcus was beginning to suspect they were wrong. The restricted section was surrounded by energy barriers and guarded by automated defense systems. Marcus presented his credentials to the scanner, and the massive gates slowly opened. What lay beyond made him stop in his tracks. 17 massive chunks of what looked like crystallized metal floated in containment fields. Each piece pulsed with an inner light that seemed to shift through colors that had no names. The largest fragment bore the unmistakable curves of a ship's hull, but it was made of materials that bent light and seemed to exist in more dimensions than Marcus could perceive. "Holy hell," Marcus whispered. "That's not the strangest part," Jake said, leading him to a control station. "Watch this." He activated a communication array, and immediately a voice filled the air. It was deep, resonant, and carried the weight of centuries. "Human," the voice said, and Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "You are the one," called Marcus Chen. It wasn't a question. Marcus stepped forward, his engineering instincts overriding his fear. "Who wants to know?" A sound that might have been laughter echoed from the speakers. "I am Zixthera, called by your people the Dragon Emperor. I am dying, human, and I have chosen you to prevent that death." Marcus felt his knees go weak. The Dragon Emperor, the creature whose name had been used to frighten children across 1,000 worlds. The being who had personally destroyed entire star systems, and he was talking to Marcus like they were old friends. "Why me?" Marcus managed to ask. "Because you are human," Zixthera replied. "Your species has a quality that mine lacks, a capacity for creation where others see only destruction. I have observed your work, Marcus Chen. You take the broken and make them whole. You see potential where others see only scrap." Jake grabbed Marcus's arm. "You can't seriously be considering this. This is the Dragon Emperor we're talking about, the mass murderer of the galaxy." Marcus looked at the floating fragments, his mind already working through the engineering challenges they represented. "What exactly are you asking me to do? Rebuild me?" Zixthera said simply. "My consciousness is scattered across 17-dimensional planes. My ship exists in a state of quantum uncertainty. The Council wishes to destroy what remains, to ensure I can never return. But I offer you something they cannot: knowledge. The secrets of technologies your species has never dreamed of. And in return, I serve humanity, not as a conqueror, but as a protector. Individual ships can't handle the larger merged entities." Marcus found himself thinking like the engineer he had always been, seeing the battle as a complex system that needed optimization. "Form up in triads," he ordered. 3 ships per formation, with overlapping fields of fire. "Eternal Dawn, can you coordinate the quantum resonance between multiple ships?" "It will require precise timing," Eternal Dawn replied. "But yes, I can synchronize their consciousness matrices for coordinated attacks." The new formation proved devastatingly effective. 3 Guardian ships working in perfect harmony could generate quantum weapon effects that were far more powerful than the sum of their individual capabilities. The Void Dwellers began to fall back as their larger entities were systematically destroyed. "They're retreating," Captain Kim reported. "Remaining entities are returning to the void." Marcus felt a moment of relief, but Eternal Dawn's expression remained troubled. "This was just a probe," the Reformed Emperor said. "They've learned what they came to learn about our capabilities, which means they'll be back with countermeasures. And next time, they won't come in such small numbers." The aftermath of the battle revealed both the potential and the limitations of their new Guardian ship fleet. They had successfully defended Sol System against Void Dweller attack, but it had required nearly every operational Guardian ship in the galaxy to do so. "We need more ships," Marcus said as the command staff gathered for post-battle analysis. "And we need them faster than our current production schedule allows." Elena Vasquez, now serving as the fleet's xenobiology advisor, "I've been studying the quantum signatures of the entities we destroyed. Your species stands on the edge of a new age, Marcus Chen. There are threats coming from the void between galaxies, things that will make my reign look like a gentle summer rain. You will need allies with experience fighting such creatures." Marcus felt the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. Every rational part of his mind screamed that this was madness. The Dragon Emperor was the most dangerous being in recorded history. Rebuilding him would be like handing a loaded weapon to a psychopath. But there was something else, something that went deeper than logic. Marcus had always been drawn to the broken things, the lost causes. His workshop was full of projects that other engineers had given up on. Ships that everyone said couldn't be repaired. Drives that were considered beyond salvation. "Show me the technical specifications," Marcus said, ignoring Jake's horrified expression. The air above the control station shimmered, and suddenly Marcus was looking at holographic blueprints that made his brain hurt. The ship wasn't just large. It was vast beyond comprehension. Its quantum matrices were woven through dimensional space in patterns that seemed to follow mathematical principles he had never encountered. "This is impossible," Marcus breathed. "The power requirements alone would drain a star." "For your current technology, yes," Zixthara agreed. "But I will teach you to build reactors that tap into the quantum foam itself. Engines that can fold space-time like origami. Weapons that can unmake matter at the subatomic level. And you'll just hand over this knowledge? Why should I trust you?" "Because, Marcus Chen, I am already dead. What you see here are the dying echoes of what I once was. If you choose not to help me, I will fade from existence within the span of your solar year. I have nothing left to bargain with except the truth." Marcus walked around the control station, studying the fragments from different angles. Each piece seemed to contain entire worlds of complexity. The engineering challenge was staggering, but that wasn't what worried him. What worried him was the question of whether a being like the Dragon Emperor could truly change. "Tell me about the war," Marcus said. "Tell me why you did what you did." The silence stretched for long moments before Zixthara spoke again. "I was not born evil, human. My species, the Draconi, were once guardians of this galaxy. We fought the incursions from the void, the things that crawled through the spaces between realities. For millions of years we held the line while lesser species evolved and grew. But something changed you. Fear changed me. When my people began to die, when I watched entire worlds of Draconi consumed by entities that should not exist, I made a choice. I decided that the galaxy needed a strong hand to guide it. I convinced myself that conquest was the only way to prepare the younger races for what was coming." "You murdered billions," Jake interjected, his voice shaking with anger. "Yes," Zixthara said simply. "I did, and I will carry that weight for whatever eternity remains to me. But my crimes do not negate the truth of what approaches. The Void Dwellers are stirring again, Marcus Chen. They have found new passages into our reality. When they come, they will not be stopped by fleets or armies. They require weapons that exist outside conventional physics." Marcus closed his eyes, trying to process everything he was hearing. On one hand, he was being offered the chance to work with technologies that would advance human understanding by centuries. On the other hand, he would be gambling with forces that could destroy everything he cared about. "I need time to think," Marcus said. "Time is the one resource I cannot provide in abundance," Zixthara replied. "Each day that passes, more of my consciousness bleeds away into the quantum foam. Soon, there will be nothing left to rebuild." Marcus looked at Jake, whose expression had gone from horrified to resigned. They had been partners for 8 years, and Jake knew that look on Marcus's face. It was the same expression he wore when he decided to take on a project that everyone else said was impossible. "If I agree to this," Marcus said slowly, "I want safeguards. Ways to shut you down if you revert to your old ways. Acceptable. Build whatever restrictions you deem necessary into my core systems. I will not resist them. And I want complete access to your memory banks. I need to understand what we're really dealing with when these void creatures arrive." "Also acceptable. Though I warn you, human, some of those memories will haunt your dreams." Marcus felt the last of his resistance crumble. This was madness, but it was also the opportunity of a lifetime, not just for him, but for all of humanity. If Zixthara was telling the truth about the coming threat, they would need every advantage they could get. "All right," Marcus said, the words feeling strange on his tongue. "I'll do it. But we do this my way, with my rules." "I would expect nothing less from a human engineer," Zixthara said. And Marcus could swear he heard satisfaction in that ancient voice. Jake shook his head, pulling out his communication device. "I'm calling Sarah. If we're really doing this, we're going to need the whole team." As Jake walked away, muttering about suicide missions and impossible projects, Marcus stepped closer to the nearest fragment. Up close, he could see that it wasn't just metal, it was some kind of living crystal that pulsed with its own heartbeat. The engineering challenge ahead of him would dwarf anything he had ever attempted. But Marcus Chen had never been one to back down from impossible odds. He had rebuilt dead ships before. Now he was going to rebuild a dead emperor. The only question was whether he would live long enough to regret it. Over the next 3 days, word spread through the salvage yard like wildfire. Marcus Chen was going to attempt something that defied every law of physics and common sense. He was going to rebuild the Dragon Emperor. The reaction was predictably mixed. Half the crew thought he had finally lost his mind. The other half were too curious about the technology to object too strongly. Sarah Martinez, the team's quantum physicist, arrived on the second day and spent 6 hours staring at the fragments before declaring them theoretically impossible but obviously real. "Marcus," she said as they stood in his workshop later that evening, "do you have any idea what you're dealing with? These quantum matrices are operating on principles I don't even have equations for." "That's why I need you," Marcus replied, spreading the blueprints across his workbench. "Zixthara says he can teach us, but I need someone who can verify that what he's showing us is actually safe." Sarah picked up one of the smaller technical documents, her eyes scanning the alien mathematics. Safe is a relative term. Some of these power calculations suggest energy outputs that could accidentally create black holes. "Good thing we're starting small then," Marcus said with a grin that didn't quite hide his nervousness. The first real breakthrough came on the 4th day. Zixthara walked them through the basics of quantum crystalline architecture, explaining how his ship's hull wasn't just armor but a living computer system that could process information on a galactic scale. "Your human computers use binary code," Zixthara explained as holographic displays filled Marcus's workshop. "My ship thinks in quantum superposition. Every atom can exist in multiple states simultaneously, allowing for computational power that exceeds anything in your experience." Marcus watched the displays with growing amazement. "You're saying your ship is essentially one giant quantum computer?" "Not quite. It's more accurate to say that my consciousness and my ship are symbiotic. We share thoughts, memories, processing power. When you rebuild me, Marcus Chen, you will be creating not just a vessel, but a new form of life." That statement sent chills through everyone in the room. Jake was the first to voice what they were all thinking. "You're talking about creating artificial life. Do we have the right to do that?" "You're not creating me," Zixthara corrected. "You're saving me, but I understand your concern. What you will rebuild will not be exactly what I was before. The trauma of my destruction has changed me, as trauma changes all conscious beings. I cannot promise you that I will be the same entity that once ruled this galaxy." Sarah leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. "What kind of changes are we talking about?" "I have lost my ability to feel rage," Zixthara said simply. "The quantum cascade that shattered me also burned away much of my emotional spectrum. What remains is curiosity, determination, and something that might be called gratitude. I find myself different than I was." Marcus absorbed this information while studying the blueprints. If it was true, then they weren't just rebuilding the Dragon Emperor, they were creating something new, something that had never existed before. The thought terrified and excited him in equal measure. Let's start with something simple, Marcus decided. Show us how to build one of your basic quantum processors. The next several hours passed in a blur of mathematical equations and theoretical discussions that pushed the boundaries of human understanding. Human hands rebuilt the Dragon Emperor's soul and ship. Part 1, HFY Sci-Fi Story.